Welcome to the Kubit Funnel Training Guide. Today we'll be talking about what a funnel is, as well as how to build them. So first, what is a funnel? A funnel is usually going to be a group of users that are moving through certain steps. So we have step 1, step 2, step 3, all the way through step 10. At its base, a funnel requires at least 2 steps, but it can have up to 10. The reason why I say usually it's users that are moving through the funnel is because there are other options as well that you can select from. This is going to depend on your organization, but in my example, I've got users, devices, clients, and events. It might be good to select other subjects depending on what you're interested in. So my dataset is the streaming dataset, and let's say I'm more interested in households than I am individual users. You might find that households share a device for a particular service, and therefore, if you wanted to get a better idea of households overall, you might want to use devices as the subject of your funnel. That way, you can find individual devices who move throughout the funnel rather than the different users who are sharing that device. Next, our other option is order. And so when you're looking at a funnel, the order really does matter. By default, we use sequence, which means that as you do step 1, there can be other events in between step 1 and step 2, as long as you do step 2 afterwards to be counted as converted. Exact is kind of the opposite of that, where step 1 happens and then step 2, step 3 need to happen immediately after each other with no other events in between. Custom allows you to pick sequence or exact and a custom mix when you're building your steps. So that would mean that if I had selected custom, I could pick sequence here between step 1 and 2, but I could make it so that step 2 and 3 have to happen exactly one after the other. Lastly, there's any, and what this means is that you pick a step for step 1, and step 2, 3, all the way through 10 can happen in any order. Step 1 is like an anchoring event, and this one will always happen first, with the rest of them happening afterwards. Accordingly, there's also several types of conversion that you can measure. The first is regular conversion, which just counts the number of people or whoever your subject is really going through the steps, and it gives you the percentage as absolute or relative conversion. The second option is frequency. So this is more like how many times did your subject do step 1 before moving on to step 2, and then how many times did they do step 2 before moving on to step 3? And lastly is time to convert. So this one will measure how much time it took for you to do step 1 to step 2, step 2 to step 3, and then across the whole funnel as well. How long did it take you to do step 1 all the way to the end? So to give an example of a conversion chart, what I can do is I can look at main landing, and I can look at if I search content. And then lastly, I can look at if somebody added something to their list. And let's say that I'm only really concerned with those who did it on iOS. So what I did right here, this is adding a filter, and I can just hit confirm to enter it, and you'll see that it appears right here. My funnel by default is looking at the last day, and it's rolling everything up to all time. You'll notice that with other funnel types in the future, it will default to all time, and this will not be an option. So you only get to choose your granularity for the conversion funnel type and not frequency or time to convert. Anyways, I can see that when I've gotten my chart, there is a drop-off that happens between these. So between step 1 and step 2, there was 81.3% of conversion. And between step 2 and step 3, there was 0% conversion. So nobody made it from searching content to adding a favorite to their list. If I wanted to change my conversion type from absolute to relative, I could click up here and do so. Because the step 1 and step 2 is calculated the same way, there wasn't a change here. But as you add more steps and as you go out a little further, looking at absolute versus relative might be more meaningful to you. So let's look at another type of a funnel chart. Next, we'll look at frequency. Here, I'll remove the filter, and instead, I'll add some segments. So let's say I want to find users who did purchase a subscription, and I'll leave this as true because they did perform the purchase subscription event. And then I wanted to conversely look at people who didn't purchase a subscription. So what I'll do here is I'll just click false. When I run this, you'll notice that the visualization looks a little bit different. We can talk about some options as well. So the first thing to call out when you're looking at a frequency funnel is that the steps are broken out. So you'll notice that right now we're just looking at step 1 to step 2. So between step 1 and step 2, the users who did purchase a subscription, and we know that they did because it's C1 or cohort 1, and this is our first one up here. They were doing this action, the main landing to search, these many times. And so you'll notice there were some who were doing the main landing about 23 times before they even got to searching content. So this can be really informative on user behavior, because if there's lots of users who are doing an action many times before they get to the expected next one, you might find that users have a lot of confusion there. Now, let's say I wanted to look at just step 2 to step 3. Looks like there's only one person in this part of the funnel who did purchase a subscription. And if I change it to include the second cohort of people who didn't purchase a subscription, then you'll notice they only did it once. And if we look at that step 1 to step 2, you can see that their behavior was a little different. Frequency funnels are really great in comparing cohorts because it really gives you a clear idea of how users are performing behaviors and performing events, and whether or not they're getting confused in doing that. Similarly, time to convert can be pretty useful in understanding that user behavior as well. So what I can do here is I'll remove these segments and I'll instead add a breakdown, and I'll do something by content type. Breakdowns are another really great way to evaluate user behavior, this time based on a property instead of user events. So you'll notice I'll have an extra toggle right here. Unlike frequency charts, time to convert has an additional option on top of the 2. So the first one is step 1 to step 2, the second is step 2 to step 3, and the last one is going to be 1 to 3. So looking at the time to convert across the whole funnel. I think this one can be particularly interesting when you're comparing the two because it gives you a better idea of what's going on. And so in this particular instance, we didn't have any users who are watching movies that converted through this whole funnel. And so that is really interesting because you might be wondering, well, what's the deal with that? I want to go do more investigation. And that's really great. In instances where you did have that kind of data, it's really good as well to look at the median and average and understand what's going on there. So for people who did watch a movie and people who did watch a show, the people who were watching shows were taking longer both by the median and by the average to get through step 1 to step 2. So even though movie users were having a much easier time moving through step 1 to step 2, they didn't have any activity from step 2 to step 3, so they're not represented in this third one as well. So overall, it gives you a really great idea of how user behavior is performing, and you can even look at it by content type, you can look at it with segments, you can look at it with additional filters, and it gives you a pretty clear idea of what's going on overall.